Good morning and welcome. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome you all to the third annual conference of the NOVA Center on Business, Human Rights and the Environment. I will say a few words to thank all of you here and all the organizers, but for now I would like to give the floor to the panelists of our opening session, starting with the Dean of NOVA School of Law, Professor Margarida Lima Rego. The floor is yours. Would you like to go?
Yes. Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are here at the Gulbenkian Foundation, but this is an event co-organized by NOVA School of Law and NOVA School of Business and Economics. We welcome you all here. NOVA University, as a public higher education institution, has as a mission to serve society at the local, regional, and global levels through the progress and dissemination of knowledge and understanding between cultures, societies, and people by way of excellent teaching and research and the provision of services based on a strong sense of community. NOVA School of Law positions itself as an innovative hub in the development of legal science and the teaching of law in Portugal. Through the debate between ideas, cultures, and talents, we create knowledge, innovative practices, and open new paths to the future. The promotion of solidarity and sustainable development is at the core of NOVA School of Law's strategy. The UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals are an invitation to the whole of society. All of us must pull our weight if we are to succeed in this very relevant and yet so very challenging undertaking of achieving a better outcome for the people and for the planet. This includes the private sector, as made clear in the UN Global Compact, which we joined in February 2021. We, as a school, have a threefold mission. The first one, in education, to provide an excellent learning experience. The second one, to produce first-rate research and achieve national and international recognition. And the third, to have a positive impact on society, contributing to its sustainable development. And so, of course, this year's conference topic is at the core of all three components, with a particular emphasis on the third one, to have a positive impact on society, contributing to its sustainable development. Corporate sustainability due diligence, from law to practice. This is our topic today. As mentioned on the conference's concept note, a growing number of states have adopted or are in the process of adopting mandatory human rights due diligence legislation, whilst at the EU level, the draft Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive is being discussed. Against the backdrop of these developments, one of the main challenges remains how to translate these requirements into practice. The aim of this conference is to bridge the gap between law and practice, and explore the implications of corporate due diligence in the management of global value chains. This is how we expect to create value, impacting positively on some of society's major contemporary challenges. With the help of all those present, we will strive to be of assistance every way we can. And now it is time for me to thank a number of people, starting, of course, with the Portuguese government, and in particular the Secretary of State for Internationalization, Bernardo Cruz, who is here today. Thank you very much for your support. As well as the Directorate General for Economic Activities of the Portuguese Ministry of Economy and Sea, and in particularly the Head of Sustainable Development Unit, Directorate General for Economic Activities of the Portuguese Ministry of Economy and Sea, Lydia Farropas. I also wish to thank the UN through its Global Policy Advisor, Lívio Sarandea, and Business and Human Rights Specialist with UNDP, Sinisa Milatovic, for their support. Of course, NOVA SBE, in the person of its Dean, Pedro Oliveira, as our sister school and partner institution, co-organizing this conference with NOVA School of Law and the NOVA Knowledge Center for Business, Human Rights and the Environment. I also thank our sponsors, PLMJ, in the person of its managing partner, Bruno Ferreira, the Portuguese Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and in particular its Secretary General, João Pedro Guimarães, Of course, the Canadian Embassy in Portugal, in the person of the Ambassador for Canada in Portugal, Elise Racicot, and the Foundation for Science and Technology. I also like to thank all the speakers and chairs of the conference and the participants of this conference. I'm sorry, I won't name them all, but you are all collectively thanked. And last but most definitely not least, I would like to thank the organizers, the persons, our people, my colleagues Claire Bright and Laura Inigo Alvarez from the NOVA School of Law and the NOVA Knowledge Center on Business, Human Rights and the Environment, and Alison Holm from NOVA SBE. Thank you all very much. I hope you have a fruitful conference today.
Thank you very much, Professor Margarida. And now we'd like to call to the stage the Dean of NOVA SBE, Professor Pedro Oliveira, who is also the Calouste Gulbenkian Chair Professor in Impact Economy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here to welcome you to this conference. You just reminded me that apart from being Dean at NOVA School of Business and Economics, I'm also a Gulbenkian Foundation Chair for what we call the impact economy. So I feel a bit at home, so I think I can say welcome to this conference. This conference is quite important for us, given the topics that we are going to discuss here today. At NOVA SBE, we try to train students to the real world out there, which means that, of course, topics such as human rights, gender equality, climate change, migrant rights, women rights, equal pay, are obviously super important for us because they are going to be super important for our students. This is from the teaching perspective. Even from the research perspective, this is also very important. And some of us, Alison, for instance, but many colleagues at NOVA SBE work in this space, which makes it even more relevant. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm really happy to have the possibility of working with NOVA Law School. This is very important for us as well. I'm very happy for the support of many institutions that are here today. I will mention them briefly, because in fact, these, of course, together with the work that we do already with Gulbenkian, give us the possibility of doing even more. And in the past couple of years, we have tried to launch a number of initiatives aimed at promoting, among others, these topics that I just mentioned. For instance, we have recently launched a master program in impact entrepreneurship and innovation. One of the key focuses is sustainability. We are in the process of launching an institute for sustainability. We are in the process of launching another institute for public policies, where in fact some of the topics that we'll be discussing here today. So this is super important for us for a number of dimensions. And again, I would like to thank all the colleagues here, but also the other partners, Nova Green Lab, PLMJ, the Portuguese Chamber of Commerce, SEDIS, FCT, the Embassy of Canada, and we have the ambassador here, and they are a share of social innovation, another of our initiatives at NOVA that deals with some of these topics that we are here today, that we are going to discuss here today. Later on, I will be in a panel, so I will be very brief. Part of my talk will be about democracy, the importance of AI in the days where we are actually dealing with it in our schools, the danger of fake news. So I'll be brief and I will stop here, and I would just like to welcome you all to this event, and again thank the organizers, Claire, Alison, among others, for putting this together and for gathering us all here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Pedro. And now we'd like to give the floor to the Portuguese Secretary of State for Internationalization, Bernardo Cruz. Thank you so much for being here with us today. We really appreciate it.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation. I was telling Claire that we should organize a daily breakfast because we seem to be together every morning here at Gulbenkian. Yesterday, I had the opportunity and the pleasure. Oh, I'm sorry. I wanted to congratulate and to mention Margarida, Pedro, Claire, obviously, the ambassador, João Pedro Guimarães, my good and old friend, and Bruno Ferreira, and thank the invitation. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to present here in the next room the Portuguese strategy for helping SMEs to deal with ESG. And that was a pivotal moment for the Foreign Ministry, and particular for the role that we are playing, helping our SMEs to be ready to face the demands of ESG. Most SMEs in Portugal are not under the purview of the due diligence or the European legislation regarding ESG or regarding sustainability. They are not listed companies, and therefore they fall outside the legislation. But they don't fall outside the policy or the practice of ESG and private sector. Because if, particularly the ones who are exporting, they need to be able to reply to the demands of their clients. And their clients, some of them large corporations, will demand from their supply chain to be ESG compatible. So even if you're not mentioned in the legislation, even if you're not part of the European setup, which is the one that worries us most, because yesterday we had the United Nations, OECD, the UN, and others. But the European Commission, everybody is publishing advice or recommendations. The European Commission is publishing legislation. So that's the one that we are focusing more. And if you know anything about EU legislation, you know that they are not easy to comply. They are like 300 pages stack of information and legislation. So for a small and medium company, it is a big burden. So yesterday we launched this strategy to help them, even if they're not mentioned in the legislation. Because if they're not mentioned in the legislation, their clients are. Their consumers are looking at the role of private sector in sustainable environmental sustainability, social responsibility. We need to help the companies to have a good governance to be able to cope with all these transformations. So it's not important if you are focused or not in EU legislation regarding ESG. It's important that your clients are. It's important that your customers are. It's important that science is telling you that we need to change the way that we do business if we want to have a planet to leave to your kids and your kids' kids. It's important to know that you, as talent that we need to attract to businesses, are not, by and large, willing to work for companies that do not have ESG or sustainability in their heart. So it doesn't matter what the law says, it matters how it applies to the whole ecosystem of economic and business. And that applies to everybody. It applies to the company that will sell pieces and parts to a larger company that is part of the legislation. It applies to the business that you are going to walk into and ask, where does this coffee come from? How was it collected? What are the social and environmental concerns of your suppliers? It applies to everybody, regardless if you're mentioned or not in the legislation. So we're very happy with the fact that we now have a structure to help the Portuguese small and medium companies to be able to cope and to adapt to the ESG directives, including the corporate sustainability directive that you're going to discuss today. There's another role for private sector that I'd like to mention, and it has to do with the impact of private sector in development. We are helping and we work with the Portuguese government and others. We work with lots of developing countries. It's part of our foreign policy to help and support the development of those countries that need some support and to take that direction. And part of that, that policy involves the role of private sector. Private sector, when investing in developing countries, when investing rightly in developing countries, when investing, taking into consideration social and environmental impact of their investment, are key, are fundamental, are essential tools of the public policy for sustainable development. We need to have the private sector engagement in the development policy. The former director of development at the OECD, Jorge Moreira da Silva, who is now Undersecretary General of the United Nations, he used to say when he was at the OECD that we in the public sphere for development, we have the millions, we can mobilize the billions, but we need the trillions to be able to cope with the 2030 agenda, and that involves private sector. Now, there was an issue with private sector investment in developing countries, and that issue was perception, apart from others that we can discuss more or less, but there was a particular issue that had to do with what was expected, or what were the expectations of the developing countries, the communities where private sector investment would go to, and the private sector investment when working in developing countries. And that was a big issue that would keep lots of lawyers afloat for a long, long time. Because the expectations of what sustainable private investment for sustainable development meant were completely different, depending on whom you were talking to. And so there was a lot of litigation, not to do with some people being bad and others being good, or some people deceiving other people, but to do with the fact that we had no understanding, no common understanding of what sustainable development meant and what was the role of private sector when investing in developing countries on the perspective from the point of view of sustainable development. That changed with the Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals created a common language that we all use. So we know exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about Sustainable Development Goals, because they are not just the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, they are the 169 targets that come within the package of the Sustainable Development Goals. So you know what is expected from private sector investment in developing countries when considering the impact in development. And that changed completely the dialogue between the private sector, the local communities, national governments in developing countries, NGOs, the communication. It made everybody talk the same language. And the SDGs have lots of virtues, and that this one is not a small one. It's a key virtue for us to be able to understand what we can expect and what we can ask from João Pedro and his members when investing in developing countries, and also what the developing countries and the communities could expect from private sector. The level of litigation around private investment in developing countries after the SDGs have dropped significantly. I wanted to talk about one more thing, and I was hesitating to do so, but Pedro Oliveira opened the door, so here we go. When he was talking about human rights and democracy and the things that he's going to talk about. I just wanted to, I would be remiss if not to take the opportunity to have a room full of law students and law researchers not to mention this. And I'll leave the thought, and I hope that we'll pick up during the day and maybe in your research and your work further. When I did my PhD 20 odd years ago, I wrote about models of democracy in Western European countries. And at the time, I was able to write and to defend and to argue that in established democracies, in Western established democracies, once you as a citizen got a right, that right was yours. You can then argue if the right was well implemented, if we should go further, if there was issues in the way that the right was understood, but the right was there and no one would take it away from you. I very much doubt that I could write that 20 years later. If I could today write down that in established democracies, once you got a right, that right was yours and nobody would take that away from you. I probably would not be able to do it. I hope the idea fosters and you will help me to read more about this and research more about this. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary of State. And now I will call to the stage Elise Racicot, the Ambassador of Canada to Portugal. And thank you so much for being here with us today as well, Elise.
Such a pleasure to be here. I just want to say, thanks first to NOVA, the big team at NOVA, whether at law or SBE. It's such a pleasure to be part of this conversation. Such an important one also. So I am today sitting as a Canadian ambassador, but I also, my career as a diplomat has been mostly on the economic side of things. So I've been helping companies do business abroad, and I've seen a change also in the last 20 years that I've been doing this job of how much companies grasp better and better, I think, how much this is important for them to think in terms of corporate sustainability and social responsibility, but also how it is an opportunity for them to do so. So I think when I think of the theme of due diligence from law to practice, I think the practice is also how do you make it attractive for people to want to be a part of this, because law is there and can set a frame and it's sometimes hard to implement. But if you also have the incentives of companies understanding how this benefits them, I think it can really make a difference. So basically, the government of Canada expects Canadian companies that are active abroad, and for us, it's most of our companies are active abroad. We're a big country and a big economy, but we have only 40 million people, so we don't have a big market. So basically, all of our companies need to be active abroad. So when we say the government of Canada expects Canadian company active abroad, it means pretty much all of our companies to abide by, of course, all relevant laws and respect human rights in their operation. And that's mostly when we refer to the UN Guiding Principle on Business and Human Rights or the OECD guidelines on multinational enterprises. But we want to go a bit further than that. So now it's been a year and a half ago, I guess. In April 2022, we published a new strategy for responsible business conduct, where we introduced a few new items. We stopped talking, by the way, it used to be CSR, so corporate social responsibility, but we changed it into responsible business conduct. This is now the way that we try to encompass the different aspects of being a member of the community and the society. So some elements of it are more in terms of prevention, but also some of them are there to support companies in implementing those things. We do have in our network of trade commissioners abroad in all our embassies and consulate over the world in more than 160 cities nowadays, people who are there to help Canadian companies in understanding their responsibilities and understanding when they're doing business in a specific market, how can they do that better? How can they do that, well, of course, legally, but also as a member of this vision of change for society in a more sustainable way. One of the really interesting element I think that we've introduced, and actually there was just a meeting a few days ago, so I don't know how it went, but it's supposed to be coming to a conclusion by the end of this calendar year, and probably we'll be able to introduce the result of that early next year. But we're creating a new standard with the Canadian standard organization for responsible business conduct. So basically, it will help companies to understand what it means and what is the path to get there, and so in a really concrete way, a little bit like if you do like ISO 9000 or something like that. So how do you become like a RBC? What's the standard that we're expecting? So beyond the law, also how do you make it into something tangible and really concrete for companies to administer? We've also introduced a lot of, and the secretary was talking about, how with the SDGs there's been less litigation, but Canadian companies, or often companies that are with their headquarters in Canada, sometimes they don't have operations there, but we have a lot of mining companies, for example. You'll hear one this afternoon that has, I think, a lot of really positive experience in terms of business and human rights and ESG and in different countries, including here. But what it means is often there's been, like in the past, a lot of litigation and for all kinds of good reasons. But we've introduced two different, the national focal points that we have in Canada, national point of contact, I should say. But also we've introduced for the first time an ombudsperson who's also responsible to follow up on claims of abuse of human rights by Canadian companies abroad, but who can also undergo on their own pursue investigation without necessarily having a claim from anyone. So NGOs, for example, are often the ones who will make those claims, and so it's also a way to bring all the sectors of society, so government, the third sector, and private companies together in a mediation type of mechanisms to be addressing some of the issues or the claims for that kind of issue. So there's a lot of interesting things that I think we're doing, but I'll just kind of go in a more practical way, I think, again, because I've been working closely. I'm not a lawyer, and I've been working closely with companies, so I'll talk in layman terms, I guess. So why would a company want to be practicing these principles? Well, because it makes business sense. We talked a little bit about that already, but I have some interesting numbers just to kind of get us thinking. Competitiveness, of course, is one of the big ones. And these numbers are more for North America, but I think they would be probably really similar in Europe, so I'll still use them. For the millennials, so many of you would, I guess, identify maybe with that, or it's 2/3 of North Americans who won't take a job if the company doesn't have strong corporate social responsibility values. And it's almost 1/3 that have left a job because the company lacked a sustainability plan. So in terms of competitiveness, if you want to retain talent and attract the best and make sure that they stay, it's really hard if you don't have a plan in terms of being sustainable. Also, companies who violate ESG norms tend to underperform others. So there's also a direct, it hurts in the pocket, basically, to do that. Consumer interest is another aspect of it. Consumers are increasingly, and I think maybe in Europe more so than in North America. In North America and Canada, we say more than 1/3 of Canadians are ready to pay more if a brand is associated with strong, sustainable, and social values. So more than 40% of Canadians will try to buy a product that has better packaging alternative than others. So these are just examples, but I think it speaks strongly about the drivers for businesses to also, beyond the law, want to make sure that they're the best at this. And finally, when we mentioned that a little bit, but investment in governance. Of course, those companies who are, traded publicly increasingly have pressures from, for example, the Toronto Stock Exchange in Canada, but others across the world who will say you need to have this number of women on your board, and you'll need to have like that objective in terms of net zero, and so on and so forth. And those have increased significantly in terms of the number of investment and the value that the stock is traded at. But it also means, like we said before, that your supply chain is going to be looking at that. So increasingly, even if you're a smaller company or if you're like a privately owned company, people will want to know, what are you doing about it? And so I guess I'll leave it at that. But I think to make it from a legal framework into practice, it's really important to think like a company thinks, and to find the incentives and also the practical pathways for those companies to know, how do I get there, and to basically make it easier for them. So the example of the standard, I think, is one that we're using. So a pleasure to be here and to have so many people interested in this topic. Thank you again for our host today, and for my colleague, Secretario, and for the Chamber of Commerce and others to be here. Glad to be part of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador. And now I'd like to call to the floor the Secretary General of the Portuguese Chamber of Commerce and Industry, João Pedro Guimarães, with a special thanks for always supporting all the activities of the Nova Center on Business, Human Rights and the Environment over the past few years now. And just to emphasize that Chamber of Commerce are also a really great ally in making this transition towards a more sustainable way of doing business. And we've also been doing work recently with the Chamber of Commerce of Mozambique, and it's really nice to see the key role that Chambers of Commerce can play through their activities and their members in helping put that agenda really at the forefront. So thank you very much, João Pedro.
Hello, good morning to you all, Mr. Secretary of State, Madam Ambassador, fellow speakers. It is a great pleasure to be here with you today, and dear Claire, of course. And it's a great pleasure because we've been with the Center since the beginning, and it's great to see all the great work that it's been doing and to get more and more impact in companies and people that follow its activities. I represent the Chamber of Commerce. As Claire said, it's a very old institution. It's actually almost 200 years old. It's 189 to be precise. And I think that we work for, of course, for companies, but I think that's what kept this chamber alive. It's a private chamber for so long. It's the fact that it's always kept in tune with times. It's always knew what's important, and it's always been besides and behind the respect for human rights and for things that we're going to speak about here today. Basically, what we want is to be useful, and being useful is like a mantra to us. You know, everything we do, we ask is for being useful to the country, to the companies, and to people, which in the end of the day is what really matters. In the first conference, which was actually online, if I remember well, I said that there's no future for business without human rights. And I think, of course, we stand behind that sentence still, and will always. But it's not only that. Respect for human rights and for the environment are increasingly central factors in any business or internationalization strategy, both of companies and, of course, countries as well, countries and companies. Initiatives like these are very, very important, and the themes that we are discussing here are already at the center of our activity at the Chamber. For you to have an idea, we organize around 100 or up to 140 initiatives a year with more than 6,000 people attending, and we try to actually pass these principles and these themes, these issues. But not only that, we cooperate with companies large and small, regarding the better knowledge, but also the actual fulfillment of the legal obligations and not only moral. And I think that's exactly what we're doing today, we're discussing here today, which is to bridge the gap between law and practice. So what we try to do, is the mantra comes back of being useful, is not only informing companies about the law or the obligations they'll be having to follow, but also how to bridge that gap and how can they apply them at home, so to speak, in their own companies, in their own daily lives. But it's not only that, actually. We believe also that the ones who do it have a competitive advantage. We've used that image before as well. We say that being in the right side of history, in this case, is also having a competitive advantage. So it's a win-win situation. You should do that because it's right, and you should do that as well because it's going to be better for you and for your company, of course. So our role is to bridge that gap and prepare companies to be able to fulfill the obligations, but as I said, to practice them as well. So the sustainable business models that we assess, being human, social, economic, or environmental, have been a guideline for our activities. And just to give you a very quick idea of a few of the initiatives we've been doing, well, besides, of course, signing the protocol with the NOVA Knowledge Center for Business and Human Rights since, I think, 2021, which is a great pleasure for us. And also, we are able to have inputs and outcomes with papers, webinars, and articles that we share through our network of more than 30,000 companies that can, through these publications that we do, they can be aware of all the changes and can start building capacity to go around them and to, not going around, but to fulfill them actually. Also last year, we organized for the first time an event totally dedicated to sustainability, ESG, and human rights. It was a great success, and we'll do that again this year on November the 8th. And of course, you are all invited to attend. It will be a pleasure to have you there. But not only as far as November, because we also have another of the big events of the Chamber taking place next Thursday, so in 2 days' time, which is called the Open Day, where we'll have a panel dedicated to these subjects as well. So you're also invited to attend. It will be a pleasure to see you all there. We work also closely with other partners. We're not specialists at the Chamber in any particular subject, so we always have partners that work with us. And we have a special partnership with the NOVA Bank and the radio station TSF, aimed at SMEs, precisely to let them know and making them aware of the obligations that are coming their way so that they can prepare for the near future and, more important as well for the future, for the long future, for what they need to do, of course. And we actually try to practice what we preach, as Madam Ambassador said. If we don't do that at home as well, people will not want to work with us. So we do a lot of in-house training, and we did it last time with the Business Council for Sustainable Development, so that the people that work with us inside CCIP are also very well aware of what we stand for and know what our mission is, and that our mission is to be useful, as I said, but is also to share with people knowledge that can be useful for them. We've also been working, and we follow, as I said, in this work, we follow very closely, of course, what the government is doing, and in particular, Mr. Secretary of State. And we want to be partners, and we believe we are indeed in doing that work and in reaching companies and helping them being aware and being more in tune with what's asked of them. And this is basically it. I just wanted to let you know a bit about the Chamber, about what we do and about what we stand for. So we'll keep in mind that we need to protect and respect human rights. And we'll keep in mind that sustainability improves the quality of life, not only our own, but of future generations. And this is what we keep in mind. I'm sure that's what you will keep in mind as well. Thank you very much, and I wish you all a useful day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, João Pedro. And now I will call to the stage Bruno Ferreira, from Managing Partner at PLMJ, who, again, I would like to extend a special thank, because PLMJ, who is one of the largest law firms in Portugal, has been one of our partners and sponsors since we started, and it's been an absolute pleasure working with you, so thank you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for organizing this. I think the first I'll be fairly quick, not to keep you from the very interesting debates we'll be having later on. I think the first part of my comment would be to congratulate Claire and Laura and the organization and the Center for Business and Human Rights and the Environment. It's great to have this partnership, and also congratulate NOVA SPE and NOVA School of Law for today's event, and thank you also to the other panel members. I think as a law firm, we have been interested in these topics and involved in this discussion for a long time now. We are convinced that we need our more than 270 lawyers to be part of this discussion, especially in bridging this gap between legal requirements and what actually happens in practice. Of course, we feel we need to be involved in this debate, and we need to be part of it, not only because our clients need us to be involved, and it's very important to debate for our mostly corporate clients, but also because our lawyers also feel that this is really important, and we ourselves were convinced that this is the right thing to do. Throughout my career, I've always been very interested in trying to understand, even if from a more amateur perspective, what makes the difference between a legal requirement that is usually complied with and a legal requirement that's usually ignored. I think most of this comes out of the fact, or most of this difference comes out of the fact of how people, or how the actual agents look at the content of these legal requirements. If they feel that the legal requirements are morally correct, or something that they need to comply with, of course, the level of compliance will be higher than if that is not the case. But usually, this is also problematic, of course, if you have the conviction that there's a regulation that needs to be complied with, that this will make it easier for confirming the level of compliance and the level of enforcement. But if that is not the case, of course, that will be harder. People will ignore the legal requirement. I think this then, in this specific topic that will be discussed today, and of course that the center has been reflecting on and researching on for a number of years now, this is very important for a number of factors. First, because you've been witnessing this road that has been walked from voluntary principles and recommendations and guidelines towards more mandatory requirements. And I feel that this has helped. Of course, it's a long road. In a perfect world, we would have had a mandatory regulation that's complied and enforced from day one. But I think, as I mentioned before, this is difficult, a difficult road to tread. So if you have this road where you're first discussing what's actually the right thing for business to do, and then there's a regulation that makes these businesses do what these recommendations initially only suggested that they should do, is of course a great way to increase the level of enforcement. And so I think this is why the debate is very interesting, and I think this debate also helps us reflect on what happens in practice, meaning that bridging the gap between law and practice looks like you're just bridging the gap between legal scholars and legal practitioners. But of course, it's much more than that. It's bridging the gap between legal scholars, legal practitioners, and what companies and businesses and people actually do on their day-to-day life. It's quite interesting that in Portuguese there's no actual single word translation for the word for the concept of enforcement. I think that goes to show that the type of culture that we have around enforcement, meaning that it's something we don't focus on usually, to say the least. But I think that the road that has been traveled from the UN guiding principles to regulation, now spreading all over the world, is something that is very useful in terms of increasing people's conviction that this is something that needs to be complied with, and this is something that then afterwards need to be enforced, but also on a more philosophical or moral perspective. We also need to focus on the impact that the fact that we're working on business organizations has on the level of compliance. It's also something that I've always been interested in, and it's something that's come up both on my legal practice, advising clients, and on managing the law firm, is the fact that we are not always aware of the impact of working in large organizations and what that has, what impact that has on your moral principles and how you act on your moral principles. So if you feel that on the day-to-day basis you need to replace your plastic toothbrush by a wooden toothbrush, but then when you're managing your company, you don't care how the products are being produced. And of course, that's even worse if they are being produced in a very distant country where you don't, that you don't often visit. So I think this is one of the big challenges in bridging this law and practice gap, is trying to understand how, I wouldn't say the corporation, but the fact that you're working in an organization has an impact on how that changes your moral convictions and things that you wouldn't do as a person on the day-to-day basis, you actually help your business do on a day-to-day basis. I think that's one of the big challenges, and that's why it's always very important to have these types of discussions and to prepare Portuguese companies for the competition, prepare Portuguese companies to help them comply with the requirements that the regulation has, with the requirements that their clients have, and this is a big part of what is useful to realizing these obstacles and making actual enforcement culture, and making sure that whatever we discuss in theory or in practice actually then does happen. So congratulations once again, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Bruno. And now I will also say a few words to close that introductory panel. Perhaps I will start with a few words to remind us of the importance of the topic we're talking about today. Human rights and environmental issues in global value chains are absolutely omnipresent. If we look at the clothes we wear, studies now estimate that about 1 in 4 of the clothes we own that have cotton in it can be traced back to Xinjiang in China and are tainted with child labor. If we look at the data from the ILO on forced labor, it's estimated that 16 million people work in forced labor in global supply chains. If we look at data on child labor from the UNICEF, it's estimated that 1 in 10 of the children in the world work in child labor. Out of these, it's about 160 million. Out of these, half of them have between 10 are between 7 and 11 years old, and a significant portion of them work in hazardous conditions, so conditions that are actually very dangerous for their health and their development. We hear on the news almost daily issues of working conditions in factories, incidents linked to health and safety standards, fires, etc. I think we all remember the Rana Plaza incident, which caused thousands of workers to die in Asia. We also are not immune from these issues here in our countries. In Portugal, for instance, the issues around the working conditions of migrant workers in the agricultural sector were all over the news just a few months ago in a particular region which is called Alentejo. Portugal is also very rich in lithium, and there is a lot of positioning now for lithium mining, but we also hear concerns from local communities about the implications the lithium mining is going to have on them. And that also leads me to the sort of environmental parts of the concerns, because human rights and environmental impacts of corporate activities go hand in hand. And it's really important to adopt a holistic view on this, and that's what we're trying to do here at the NOVA Center on Business, Human Rights and the Environment. And in fact, the interconnection between human rights and the environment was reaffirmed very clearly by the UN General Assembly in July 2022, when it recognized the right to a clean, safe, healthy and sustainable environment as a human right in and of itself. Now, the good news is we're seeing tremendous improvements and tremendous changes in the field of business and human rights over the past few decades in particular. To date, 32 countries have adopted a national action plan on business and human rights, the last one being Vietnam. Portugal is in the process of adopting its own national action plan on business and human rights, and we're very lucky to have today with us the team who is developing the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights for Portugal. And in terms of regulation, what we see is different approaches from different continents across the globe. So to sort of regulate the human rights and environmental implications of business activities. In the US, in Canada, in Australia, we can see approaches that are linked to requirements in terms of reporting, around issues of modern slavery and child labor. We can see also import bans around products that are tainted with forced labor or modern slavery. In Asia, we saw last year Japan released its guidelines on human rights due diligence, which have been quite influential. And of course, in Europe, we have the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, and amongst many other laws that is currently being discussed. And this does not come out of the blue. It really seeks to implement and harden international standards that have been already there for a number of years, and really help companies with giving them the actual blueprint, the means on how to fulfill their responsibility to respect human rights and to respect the environment, in particular through having human rights and environmental due diligence processes in place to become aware of the impact that they can have on the people and on the planet, but also to have and put in place concrete action plans in order to address them and to remedy when harm have actually occurred. What I find particularly interesting is also to see the extraterritorial implications that that draft directive is already having. I was in Mozambique a few months ago working on a project led by the UN, and I spoke and I gave a training to companies, including and the Chamber of Commerce there, and companies were very aware of these legislations and were very aware of the implications that these were going to have on them, not directly, because they weren't for most of them in the scope of the directive, but indirectly for being within the supply chains of larger European companies that were within the scope. And so they really saw the need for them to start on their sustainability journey and to start implementing human rights and environmental due diligence processes as a crucial step in order to not to be excluded from certain markets, but also to gain a competitive advantage over certain other companies in other countries of the regions, for instance. And here we find again this notion of competitive advantage that we've heard a lot from previous speakers. In our study for the European Commission, we saw that one of the key incentives for companies to put in place and to implement human rights and environmental due diligence processes were linked to the pressure coming from consumers, coming from investors, and we also heard that in the speech of Madame the Ambassador. We also have heard from previous co-panelists the business case for being sustainable. But there is also the human rights case for being sustainable. And for doing it and having strategies and processes in place in order to allow better outcome for the people and for the planet. Now, João Pedro Guimarães also spoke about being on the right side of history, and I think that's what we're all doing here today, to be talking about these issues and trying to work together towards more sustainable practices. We also see increased regulatory pressure. We heard also about from companies in particular that are the sort of regulatory burden that this can cause sometimes on them. The reassuring news here is that these laws have a common language, and we heard about the idea of common language earlier, the common language that comes from the international standards. And here I'm referring to UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, the OECD guidelines, which means that they are not reinventing anything. They are not creating new requirements. They are hardening, they are transforming existing international standards into legal requirements. This year we have chosen, as you know, to focus the topic of this conference on the draft corporate due diligence, sustainability due diligence directive, with the idea of looking from law to practice, because now we have a text. It might not be the final version yet, but we have a text. And so the idea is to start thinking about how do we actually implement it, how do we get it right, how to implement human rights and environmental due diligence processes appropriately so that we can actually make a difference. In order to answer this question, we will have 4 panels today. In the first panel, we will hear about the opportunities, but also the implementation challenges that come with this draft Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. We'll hear from perspective from the private sectors, from companies, what are the challenges faced by companies. We'll hear from civil society and academia as well. But then we'll also look at concrete solutions to address these challenges. So how can we improve the situation and the challenges that companies may face? And that could be, for instance, through well-crafted contractual clauses, and we'll hear about that as well. That can also be through technology, and that will be the topic of our second panel, which will focus specifically on technology in the world of business and human rights. Technology both as a tool that can help us and can help companies in particular, for instance, map their supply chains, but also we'll look at the risks of technology in terms of human rights. Next, we will focus on the concept of responsible disengagement, which has been particularly put under the spotlight with the war in Ukraine, and is an essential part of doing due diligence right. And then last but not least, we will talk about due diligence and remedy. We know that access to remedy is the third pillar of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, but it's also an integral part of human rights and environmental due diligence that is often overlooked. Now, I won't speak any longer because I want to leave the floor to our panelists. But I wanted to thank, first of all, my co-organizers, Laura Inigo Alvarez and Alison Holm, for the tremendous work that they have done. The students that have been helping us with the organization, they have done a fantastic job. Our partners, the Portuguese government, also our sponsors, PLMJ, the Chamber of Commerce, the Embassy of Canada, FCT, and also, of course, our speakers, our panelists, our chairs that today come from 4 different continents and represent a perspective from multi-stakeholders. We'll have, as I mentioned, people from the private sector, we have policymakers, people from the government, we have civil society, international organizations like the UN, academia, etc. So the idea is really to hear these different voices. And as we want to hear the different voices, we don't want to miss out on the youth voices. And that's why we have decided to give a special place to youth ambassadors that are sitting here that will have a specific interaction with the panelists. They will have a dedicated time to interact and ask questions to panel before we open the floor to the audience, to really hear from these young voices, because they are tomorrow's business leaders, they are tomorrow's NGOs, civil society members, etc., and we want to hear from them. Last but not least, I would like to thank the audience, both in person but also online. I know we have many people following us online, for being here. It is my absolute pleasure to be talking and exchanging with you on this topic today. And so thank you to all of you.